Hello, we're going to now go over the section on philosophical religion. Since this is not a course in philosophy, I will not get too much into all the diversity of thought in the history of Hinduism, but I would like to go over the Vedantic tradition. So there are 6 philosophical schools of Hinduism that can be summarized into 3, and what is plurality, duality, and singularity. So you have that's all the logical possibilities you can have. It's kind of the way in which Aristotle categorized governments in the world, the forms of government. You can have a government by one, a monarch or a tyrant, a government by few, an aristocracy or oligarchy, or a government by many, which can either be a democracy or a anarchy. So this is the way in which you can think of it. So one, few, and many. In this case, the Vedantic school will be the most significant one. It is the one that has attained its most dominance in the history of Hinduism. And there are 2 specific thinkers that I like to highlight because of their importance and their contribution to the development of Hindu thought. One is going to be Shankara, and the other one will be Ramanuja. So Shankara lived very shortly. He lived from 788 to 820 of the Common Era, so a very short life. We are going to have is that he was one of those exceptions to the Varna Ashrama Dharma system, since he goes immediately within his late 20s and early 30s into this stage of meditation and ultimate reality. Now, what I like to bring up is I will explain to you how a Hindu would make sense of the existence of this world, and it all hinges upon this idea of an analogy to a dream, and a dream analogy. We're all familiar with it. We all experience dreams to greater or lesser lengths, but we all are familiar with the idea of having dreamt something and then coming to wake up and realize that the dream that we had, whether pleasant or not, or otherwise, it was just a dream. It was not something to be conceived as real. So this is what they use in the Advaita. The Advaita Vedanta is a philosophical school that rests upon the Upanishads. Remember, that was the most philosophical expression of writing in the Vedas. So this is what the analogy of a dream goes. The analogy of a dream is used to explain Advaita. As in a dream, a common view of reality held by many is not guaranteed of truth. And this is what happens in your dream, is that there is the thinker, and then there may be you in the dream, and then there are others in the dream. And so because you take yourself to be real, it doesn't mean that you are actually real. The other one is that a shared illusion does not guarantee objective reality. In a dream, there are many participants, and in the end, they all turn out to be illusory. As in a dream in this life, there is one self behind many apparent selves. So here I am appearing to a lecture, and you are watching the lecture, and there is a 7 point something billion people in the planet, and they are all simply the product of one mind, which is Brahman. So there you have 3 descriptions of it. Just because you think you're real doesn't mean that you're real. Just because you have a shared illusion does not guarantee reality. And 3, there is one self among behind the apparent selves. And then last of all, the only way to realize that you were dreaming is by waking up, which is in this case moksha or enlightenment, having a experience that enables you to see that. So that is how a Hindu would reason. So you can't look at a Hindu and say, but look, like Samuelson trying to disprove George Berkeley by kicking a rock and then making sound, or causing pain. That is not sufficient, because we experience pain in dreams. You experience emotional states. You can be just exuberant in your happiness in a dream. You couldn't believe that this was possible, or you could be deeply distraught or terrified. You can have a nightmare that may scar your conscience. So in a dream, we experience all the same things that we experience in this life, and in many cases we confuse one with the other. So how do you know, and this is what the Hindu is going to ask, how do you know that this life is not a dream? And again, what are you going to appeal to? The things that have to do with the senses can all be replicated in dreams. Time passes in dreams as well as in reality. So the Hindu have had this ability of questioning things to the point where others from the outside tend to dismiss them rather than answer their objections. And so that is Shankara, Shankara's conception of Hinduism, and that is called absolute non-dualism. There is nothing besides Brahman. You can think of it this way. Here is Brahman, this one tiny little circle, which is spirit. And then out of that, he is dreaming this illusory world, and everything that you experience and everything who we are and past, present, future is all contained in this illusion. But this is just merely an illusion. Now, what's going to happen in Hinduism is going to happen in every other tradition, which is when somebody comes up with a way of explaining the religion, then other people subsequently will come and raise questions to see if that interpretation of Hinduism is in fact meaningful. And that's exactly what happened here. Shankara passed away, and then about 200 years later, you had another thinker who came to the scene. His name is Ramanuja, and he comes at about 1017 to 1137. Yes, he claimed to live 120 years according to Hindu tradition. Now, here is where you see the beauty of ideas being expressed through time and the best minds coming together and discussing them. And so here you have the two titans of Hindu thought coming into collision. And so what's going to happen is Ramanuja is going to raise questions about Shankara's interpretation of Hinduism. So Ramanuja's interpretation is called qualified non-dualism. So not everything is one, but with qualifications, and that is Brahman, which is the sum total of everything that existed in this dream, your individual self. When it comes together, then that whole is Brahman. Your individual existence continues and pre-existed before that. But Brahman is the sum total of all the individual selves that come together. So there you have two interpretations. There is one without any distinctions at all, and then the many that comprise one. And both claim to be Vedantic. They both claim to rely on the Upanishad. Both claim to be faithful to the Hindu traditions. Now, here are some questions that they raised to one another. Okay. Shankara did not have the luxury of responding to Ramanuja because he passed away, but here are some questions. Ramanuja is going to look at Shankara's interpretation, and he is going to raise the following question, which is, where does the illusion reside, Shankara? If Brahman is all that exists, and there is this illusion out here, an illusion is the product of a mind. Who is having an illusion? Now remember, when you have an illusion is a mistaken perception. So when I'm walking around, I enter into my future to be office, and all of a sudden I turn on the light and I see this thing that looks like a snake, and I get really scared and jump back. And I realize on a second glance that it was a rope that was in the ground. Now Ramanuja would say, you need to have an object of perception for you to be able to claim that there is a snake there. In your system, there is nothing there. There is only Brahman. So where does the illusion come from? The illusion cannot be in Brahman because Brahman is pure consciousness. Brahman is pure bliss. He's infinite in knowledge, so he cannot be deceived. On the other hand, I cannot be the product of the illusion because I am part of the illusion. So I cannot cause the illusion that I am myself the subject to. So that is one difficulty. And then he follows up with another point, which is not only where does the illusion reside, but how can Brahman be concealed from himself? It doesn't make sense. If Brahman is the only being that exists, and human beings are seeking to find liberation and enlightenment, well, how come Brahman doesn't realize that this is an illusion? It's like the absurdity of this can be clearly seen by playing hide and seek by yourself. So imagine you are pretending and you start counting until 10 or 20 or however long you want to do it. And then all of a sudden you're done as a 9 and 10. And what are you going to say? Well, there you are. What can you hide from yourself? It's not possible. So how can Brahman be deceived about its own existence, given that he is pure bliss? That is a problem. And then the other one, so where does the illusion reside is one. The second one is how can Brahman be concealed from himself? How can he be ignorant of his own existence? Three is how can the world be neither a thing, something that is real? It cannot be a thing that is real because then that will be creation. That would be theism, not pantheism. And it cannot be an illusion because we cannot account for that illusion. So Shankara is now stuck. It cannot be neither real nor unreal. It can neither be a thing nor a thought. And Ramanuja is going to raise the question, well, what is it then? Can it be defined? Is it meaningful? And those four objections stand as very meaningful challenges to Shankara that require an answer. And of course, the response by Shankara would be, it is an is, it is an isn't, it is in both, it is in neither. Silence is the highest philosophy. And that is, it cannot be grasped by the human mind. This goes beyond logic, beyond our ability of our mind to make sense of these distinctions. You have to transcend that. Now, the question is, what does that look like? And what does it mean for a human being to stop being rational? Well, those are some of the difficulties. And now, Ramanuja is going to encounter other set of difficulties. And I'll explain this very briefly. If everything, imagine the whole is made out of parts. If each one of the parts, they can either be temporal or finite, or they will be infinite. Well, if all the parts are parts and they all come together to make the whole, if all of them are limited in their existence, they cannot be combined into an infinite existence. It doesn't work that way. The distinction between infinitude and finiteness is a qualitative difference, not a quantitative. You don't get a certain number. It's like adding numbers and then all of a sudden you get to infinity. It doesn't happen that way. It's logically not possible. So Ramanuja encounters that problem. What are these beings, these individual beings that exist? So both they are finite. If they are finite, then the whole cannot be infinite. Brahman could not be eternal. So that's a problem. But if you say no, those entities, each one of them is infinite. But if you are infinite, then you are complete, then you're no longer a part. In which case, you don't have qualified non-dualism or Advaita Vedanta. What you have there is each one of the persons is going to be infinite, and a distinct person, you have a plurality of infinite beings. So on either way you go, limitations tend to be encountered. These philosophical problems still exist today. They remain unresolved. And the ordinary response to that is to try to transcend rationality and to speak of the limits of reason and our inability to grasp distinctions, and how reality goes beyond binaries, and the law of identity and the law of non-contradiction, the law of excluded middle do not apply to reality. There is a higher sense of consciousness and a higher expression of thought that is beyond description. So that is going to be something that was there in the very beginning of Hinduism. Remember that story of creation when there was neither being nor being? Who can really know? The gods can't tell us because they themselves were not there. So that uncertainty about knowledge has lingered and continues to linger at the core of Hinduism, an inability to explain the whole in the face of challenges. So I will stop here. I know this was a challenging lecture. It may have been quite unusual, but I would encourage you to look up Shankara and Ramanuja. If you want to understand Hinduism, these are the best minds in the history of Hinduism. These are the ones that deserve to be read and thought about and reflected on. So I would encourage you to do that. You can look in the press so you know the exact spelling of their name, Ramanuja and Shankara. Okay, we'll see you back.